Everyone, and thank you for joining in on the coffee with Belly this morning. Just wanted to quickly touch on weaning, which is sort of around the corner on the horizon for a lot of people, depending on what this weather event's doing on the east coast. Particularly, it's posing some problems. But I really just wanted to start to touch on some of the things that we can consider as part of a good weaning practice and management to make sure these animals not just survive but actually really thrive into their growing phase of post weaning. I just wanted to paint a picture before we started that if we put ourselves in the shoes of a weaner, how stressful, how disruptive it can be to have all those things that they know is familiar and common to be taken away. So, if you could think of yourself as a 10-year-old kid, they've been put on a plane, separated from their parents, flown to Japan, been asked to speak a different language, not know anyone, take their shoes off when they're inside, sit down on the floor to eat and eat with their hands. It becomes a really challenging and stressful environment. And typically that's what we see with weaning is where we're isolating from their social group. We start to take their nutrition away from them by stopping to use by providing milk. So there's a comfort factor there. And we also then start to change the way that they behave with each other because there's a pecking order that develops through, the top lambs being heavier and the lighter lambs being lighter. We get a bullying effect. So what we need to consider is how do we manage the stress for starters, and then how do we actually support and supplement animals through the weaning process? And weaning is a date in a lot of people's calendars. And in my thinking, weaning needs to be actually thought of as a process rather than a date. And we need to give ourselves and the animals time to get that process done. So it's 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks in my thinking that if we can manage these animals well, we get the real opportunity to drive production and profitability out of them really quickly. So just from a physiological point of view, these guys aren't actually born as a functioning ruminant. So they don't really have the ability to digest grass and turn that into the energy and the protein that they need as an adult or as a ruminant. So their ecology and their physiologies evolved over time. So they're actually born a lot like us and pigs as a monogastric, where their ability to digest milk is really strong. So they've got a acid and enzyme primary function within the stomach, which takes milk and turns it into usable energy and protein sources within the animal. Over time, that decreases, or the rumen starts to develop. So we start off with a little sac on the side of the throat and the esophagus, and then over time that ruminal bag develops into a 15 litre vessel by the time those animals are adults. So what we need to focus on is how do we transition those animals from milk eaters to hard feed eaters, and then what we can do to minimise the stress and the implications that we really associate with weaners, such as ill-through deaths, slow growth rates, snotty noses, runny eyes, all those sort of things that we accept as weaning behaviour. It's just not good enough. So part of the process for me really starts with the education. So we need to be able to feed ewes and lambs together, and a small amount of 50 to 70 grams of a grainy type diet or something they're going to see when they get to the weaning process is a really good way to start. So typically ewes do know how to come to a trail and eat. If we can educate those lambs to do the same thing while they're on mum, the process of weaning becomes a hell of a lot simpler. So if we can get 3 to 4 feeds of something in front of those ewes and lamb units prior to weaning, the process of weaning becomes a lot more streamlined and smoother when we do get to the yards and we have to separate. Once we get to the yards, I think there's a couple of points of animal health and stress management that I'm a really big fan of. And one of them is a vitamin shot called vitamin A, D, and E. It does a really good job in maintaining immunity and it helps the vaccines to work. So really just supporting the stress that these animals are going through. When an animal's stressed, their immune response is suppressed. So if we can do something to nurture that immune response, vitamin A, D, and E is a great tool for that. On top of that, there's another vitamin, which is B12. Now, B12 really does help with stress, but it also is an energy utilizer. So its job is to allow energy to get sort of out of the feed and into the animals at a cellular level. So vitamin B12 is really important for that process. And it tends to provide a calming effect by combining those two injections at the point of processing after drafting of those weaners. And then the third one, which is a bit of a non-negotiable in my world, is clostridial vaccine. So 5-in-1, typically 6-in-1 in lambs to cover off on cheesy gland as well. It tends to act as the follow-up from lamb marking. So making sure that we're 28 to 42 days post our first vaccine at marking. That secondary dose is a real booster to get immunity up. In a year like this, remember that vaccines are under a lot of challenge, particularly from pulpy kidney with the amount of green feed and high quality feed coming in. So keeping a regular vaccine program on track with those animals. So in high challenge situations, even up to every 5 weeks for a vaccine is quite a sensible option if we think we're under a high pressure situation. From a feeding perspective, we need to really think that these animals start at the process of weaning, where milk's supplying something like 22% crude protein, really high, 10, 12 megajoules of energy for those lambs. And then we come in and draft them, and that's it. We're saying, here's a bit of hay, good luck. And I think it becomes really important that we support that process of weaning from a nutritional standpoint. And if we treat it as a process over 2 or 3 weeks, it actually turns into a really good production driver. So my expectation in a good weaning process is that those animals should actually be gaining weight from day dot. So if we can get sort of 100 grams a day from the process of weaning, we really start to move forward well and set those animals up for life. And every day of weight loss equates to about 3 days at the other end. So if we've got a weaner that loses weight potentially for 2 to 3 weeks, we can add 6 weeks onto crucial events, whether that's time to harvest or even just for joining in new lambs. 6 weeks can be a hell of a long time, and that all starts back at weaning. Part of that drafting process as well is actually putting some cohorts together, like with like in terms of body weight. So making sure that the bullies are not impacting on those light lambs. So typically we'll draft 3 ways. One will be the tops, then we do an average, and then we do the real tail. And the breakup of that is generally 10 or 20% in the tops. The bulk sits in the middle, and then we've got a tail of 10 to 15% as a rule. So really just focusing on getting cohorts of lambs together so that they're like with like, and the impact of bullying's a hell of a lot less. If we go back to the nutrition side of things, we need to be able to provide good open access to feed for these guys. So open troughing, allowing around 5 centimetres per head is ideal if we can manage it, to allow every animal to come in and feed well. The product that we recommend and have done a lot of work with is a Protect S Wean. So it's been designed to really fill that gap between being a complete milk eater as an early lamb to being a grass eater. So it's about transitioning the ruminant, it's about managing stress, and it's about saturating vitamins and minerals to really make sure that they can thrive from the starting point. We normally start at about 75 grams per head per day, and increase in increments of about 25 grams per head. So over about a 2-week period, we end up with about 400 grams going into them on a daily basis by the end of that period. And depending on the starting weight, we should see those animals nearly ready to transition back onto full grass, potentially with some further grain support if needed. But it's really a case of just let's get weaning out of the way. Let's get these animals successfully stress managed, nutritionally adapted, socially adapted, so that they can thrive from the day they start. So a 14-day program typically costs around about $3 to $5, depending on the lamb weight. So really focusing on investing early so we're not playing catch up, focusing on making sure that we are providing those nutritional needs at that critical time of stress, stops the fence walking, stops the weight falling off, and really just takes that tail end lamb out of the system where we've got snotty noses and weepy eyes and just general ill thrift. So it's really just a case of being considerate in terms of weaning, really focusing on managing stress and animal health treatments early at that processing, get the drafting sorted so we've got cohorts of like with like, Start to move then into feeding programs where we've got good access to plenty of trough spacing, so there's easy access for lambs to get a feed. Make sure that we've got ad lib fibre available at all times, and make sure the water's clean, potentially twice a day, just to minimise things like risk of coccidiosis. Particularly, it's a disease of hygiene. So clean water will induce more drinking. More drinking induces more eating. So really focusing on looking after these animals, because they are babies and they need to be managed that way. I'm also a big advocate of weaning earlier than what we traditionally look at. So with a program like we've just discussed, the opportunity to get in and wean lambs at sort of 14 to 15 kilos really does change the dynamics of a business over time, where you halve your stocking rate the day we wean. So it's really a matter of focusing on those animals and being confident and proactive in the way that they're managed so that they can thrive. The day we get weaning done, we halve our stocking rate. We've got a cohort of animals moving forward for the rest of their life, and they tend to be more resilient and more productive into the future if we get that weaning process right. And that doesn't matter whether it's a crossbred or a composite or a merino. It's quite feasible to be weaning merinos at that sort of weight, as long as we get our management structure right. All those programs that I've mentioned are on our website, so proagnicom. If you just jump into the products, there's some weaning guidelines and protocols. Happy to take any questions if there's any questions from this morning. I want to keep it relatively short and sharp, down to 20 minutes. Everyone's got a day to get on with. So if anyone wants to drop any questions into the chat, happy to answer anything specific. But it's really a case of just consider these weaners as babies. We need to take the attitude that they need to be cared for and looked after for not just 1 day, 2 days, but we need to be progressing them and putting our management structure over them for about a fortnight at least, or potentially 3 weeks, depending on the conditions. One of the other things that's sort of occurring this year, which I think is important to mention with the feed situation, is risk of flies. So if you do happen to be tipping weaners out into big, hard, wet country, really think about trying to open up that pasture, whether it's drag a gate round, put some slashing tracks in through it. We need to take some of that humidity out of the air, because the flies will absolutely just propagate really heavily if we are not considerate of that situation. The flies are going to be quite bad this summer, as we're already starting to see. In terms of what we're seeing with the wet weather, it's a challenging situation. If we've got the opportunity to get weaners on relatively hard, high country, maintain that hoof integrity, just to give them a chance to build some resilience. We don't need sore feeding weaners to compromise the impact of being separated from their mum at the same time. So hard rocky ridges are ideal. Plenty of people have been using a lot of copper sulfate this year as well to manage feet, which has been a reasonably successful program, but it needs to be consistently done. The other point I wanted to touch on is just be aware of grain coming off after harvest this year with mycotoxins. So there's a fair amount of fusarium head blight about already. So just be considerate when we're looking at buying grain. Make sure we try and get some quality done. Ask for some counts. They'll actually do a screening for toxins, and really focus on making sure that the quality of grain is high in test weight if we can find it. We're not too concerned about protein in cereal grains. We're really looking for test weight. Part of the Protect range that we've really focused on is being antibiotic free, and that really suits into market demands into the future. So T5 recently announced that they're going to be looking for a bulk of their lambs next year, I think about 80%, to be ionophore free, so no Bovatex or Rumensin into those lambs over their whole life. The Protect S Wean is completely ionophore free, so it allows us to fit into those market niches moving forward. We might just pull it up there. If there's any more information, please jump onto our website and shoot us an email to the info account, and we can certainly respond in more detail if you've got any more questions. Thanks everyone for jumping on.